Could you talk a little bit about the hashtag mentioned in your paper, Why is my curriculum white?
Why is my curriculum white, and other decolonial movements that have come out of student movements from higher education establishments. Probably the most famous is Rhodes Must Fall.
Although the movement is often famously linked with a UK university, it actually started in Cape Town, where the previous images are from.
What these student activists are doing is they're trying to bring attention to the fact here is like, well, why is it so easy for me to come up with a name like Charles Darwin and not to be able to come up with the name of a non-white expert as easily? And what they're doing is they're highlighting that our curriculums are biased in favor. There's a Eurocentric bias, there's a white bias in the curriculum and in the nature of the resources that we tend to look at. And this is across the board in all disciplines. It can be from English literature all the way through to physics, is that there is a bias towards a Eurocentric view of the world and Eurocentric views of knowledge making. And what we need to start to do is to acknowledge that bias if we're going to be able to break the mold and think more critically and think more effectively.
I think at school the curriculum was mainly focused on white men. I think we had one African American writer.
It's that typical thing, which is pale, male, and stale. It's a whole bunch of dead white men. What we're not trying to say is stop reading Shakespeare or stop reading or stop reading any of those people. Obviously, keep reading them, but the idea that somehow that their contribution is more important than or should be studied to the exclusion of work from other parts of the world and from non-white people, that's where the racism is. You see, it's baked into the system. For me, that's been the real revelation. I never knew all the things I never knew until I look into it for myself. And actually, that's a lot for people to have to do for themselves. And also, when you compound it with the fact that we're sending people to university to further indoctrinate them into these particular ways of thinking, that's hugely problematic.
Have educational establishments made an attempt to diversify their curriculum?
Yeah, I think there's definitely hope because people of my generation and academics who are up and coming are much more aware of these notions. We've still got a very long way to go, but I think in the UK particularly, we can follow the example of the US because critical race theory is so much further along over there. What's happening is we're starting to become aware that there is a problem that needs addressing. We're not at the stage where we're starting to implement solutions or trying to make it meaningful, because that kind of change is really difficult in the absence of Black scholars, in the absence of Black professors, in the absence of Asian scholars and Asian professors. And that is what we then need to start doing, is saying, well, actually, what are the aspects of our society that means that those people are underrepresented in academia? What can we start to do to diversify the nature of academia? Things like Black History Month do happen in this country, but it's still very tokenistic. You know, why should it only be a month? And while it's important to acknowledge things like the history of empire and the history of the enslavement of African people, if those are the only ways in which non-white people are represented in the curriculum, that's still very tokenistic. We need to be able to widen the field and say that there is a whole world more out there. Yes, it's important to acknowledge the things that were done badly, the crimes of the past, but that's not the sum total of what non-white people can bring to the wealth of experience.
What would you like to see taught in the curriculum with respect to history of non-white people's contributions?
The main thing that I want to see, because I'm a historian of science, is more history of science. So I want more people to be aware of the fact that we weren't always racist, that race is a construct that comes out of the ideas of the Enlightenment in Europe. I want them to be aware that these things are not fixed as a fundamental principle. And then hopefully when people start to know that, it means that they can open up and think, you know, maybe I should be looking at the work of these African writers and African poets, a lot of whom write in English. So it's not like an excuse to say, oh, well, they're writing in languages that we don't know. Certainly that is a challenge as well. But it's being able to get into the mindset that there isn't just this solid canon of white male European writers, that they're the ones who have all the knowledge, and that there are other philosophies that exist outside. From my point of view, that's the main thing that I want people to know, is that there exists this whole other world out there. But actually, it's kind of, again, a product of my own indoctrination, that I can't name all these different people to you because I'm a product of that white curriculum myself. So I'm at the stage where it's like I know that there's a problem and I've looked into the history of that problem, and that's the story that I want to tell. But there are plenty of other scholars who you can talk to say, these are the people that we need to be reading, and these are the names, and this is how we start to diversify the curriculum.